Hello and welcome back to Bigfoot Lake. Appreciate you stopping by. Hope you're ready for two more amazing Bigfoot encounters. First one is from the state of Illinois, which is Washington County, and the second one is from the state of Washington in King County. So with that being said, pull up a stump, sit back, and I hope you enjoy our two encounters. First encounter begins in Washington County, Illinois, and that's the city of Nashville. I'm going to tell this story only once. I had never planned on telling it to anyone ever, but here it goes. My name is Floyd, and I am 40 years old with no reason to make up a story like this. There is nothing to gain, nothing to lose. I really am not trying to scare anyone. We all know there are many other things to be scared of in this world besides someone making up some crazy story about Bigfoot. I have heard some really hard to believe stories about Bigfoot, but hey, whatever floats your boat. My encounter begins while on a fishing trip just south of Nashville, Illinois, at Washington County Lake. It was July 22nd, 2010. I had decided to go catfishing. After loading up the boat and all my gear, I got to the ramp around 5:30 p.m. The sun was hot, so after putting the boat in, I headed for a cove on the northeast side of the lake where the trees would shade the water. I was anchored about 30 feet from the bank and enjoying the peace and quiet. I caught a mess of fish and decided to fish well into the night as the catfish were biting great. It was now about 11 p.m. and things started to stomp around in the woods. I figured it was a deer or raccoons. I could hear the rustling around not far in the woods. It would make moving noises about every 10 to 15 minutes. I never really thought much of it and was much more into catching fish than worrying about an animal in the bushes. The time had passed and I heard a splash that made the sound of a large rock being thrown into the water about 20 to 30 feet behind the boat. At first I thought someone was screwing around and threw a rock into the water. I looked at the clock. It was 1:27 a.m., now the 23rd. After thinking it over, I decided it had to be a fish because for someone to be that far back into the woods, they had to walk a good distance, and I would have noticed a light. Plus, as big as the sound of that splash was, they would have had to have been Superman to have thrown a large rock that far out into the water. I continued fishing and never heard any other noises, and after a bit I forgot all about the splash. As the fishing died down around 3 a.m., I decided to pack it up and head for the dock. As I was pulling the anchors out, I heard a noise in the woods just from the bank, like something was startled when I stood up to pull the anchors. I figured I spooked a deer bedded down. I was only able to run my trolling motor on my boat because the lake has a 10 horsepower limit and my outboard motor was bigger than 10 horses. So as I am trolling back to the dock, I hear the noise of whatever I spooked in the woods moving along the edge line of the woods as I moved in the water. This went on for about 3/4 of a mile, and I was now about 100 yards from the dock. All around the dock, bait shop, and bank, there are street lights in the dock area, and the woods thin out to none. As I reached this area, the movement in the woods stopped. Well, now I was curious as what the hell animal would follow me like that. I tied off the boat and walked up to the parking lot to get the truck when I heard a grunt sound. I opened the truck door and it grunted again, So I fired up the truck and shined my headlights toward the area where the grunt sound came from. To my surprise, there was a large set of yellow eyes in the woods as I studied them. I could see them blinking and noticed they were really high in the air, 8 feet up or so. Not thinking anything fearful, I backed down the ramp and I loaded the boat. After getting everything buttoned down and ready to head home, I got in the truck and headed up the ramp. I looked for the eyes in the same area and I did not see them. Leaving the lake consists of a 20 miles per hour speed limit and a winding road for a few miles. As I passed the check-in station close to the road, I heard a large bang, like something hit the boat. So I stopped and got out to see if I had lost something. Everything looked fine. Nothing fell out as far as I could tell, and nothing ran into the boat, like a deer or whatever. So I got back into the truck, and before pulling off, I hear the noise again, like something hit the boat. I hit the brake lights so to light up the boat a bit and looked into the rear view. As I looked, I saw what looked like a very large man standing next to the boat. I was about to jump out and ask what the hell he was up to when I got an eerie feeling and something just told me to drive. So I hit the gas with my eyes glued to the figure. As I took off, it started towards the truck. So I hit it, letting gravel fly as I was up to about 35 miles an hour, when something hit the truck, making the truck shake. Well, now I was done messing around and said piss on the speed limit. I guess I lost it at what speed I don't know. When I got to the highway, I got out to check the truck and there was, and still is, a nice dent high on the passenger side bed of the truck. I went home, unloaded the boat, I grabbed a shotgun and headed back out there. I crept along those roads until dawn, looking for whatever it was that hit my truck, and I never seen a thing. I still fish there today, but never alone. So that concludes our first encounter. So what do you guys think of that? Just a nice, peaceful evening into the morning, catfishing out on the lake, and have the big giant rock thrown and splashing into the water. And it's almost like this thing stalked him back to the boat ramp. And that's not even getting into the whole incident where this thing hit his boat twice and then left a dent in his truck. So what do you guys think of this one? Have you ever heard a story with, or a Bigfoot encounter where perhaps the Bigfoot pursues a vehicle and actually strikes the vehicle, leaving damage? You let me know if you've ever heard a story quite like this one. And if you're from that Nashville, Illinois area, that Washington County lake, if you're familiar with that area, yeah, let me know. Leave me a comment. I'd like to get your thoughts on this one. And then one more final question for you. This guy says he still fishes there today, but not alone. What would you say? Would you go back there fishing? Yeah, leave me a comment. Let me know. I'm just curious how many would avoid that area in the future, or would you go back there? Yeah, let me know. Okay, so next we have actually a pretty amazing encounter. And this is from Washington State. Yeah, that Pacific Northwest area. We know it's legendary for encounters with Bigfoot. And this one actually comes from King County, Washington. And this was in July of 1998. It says it was approximately 1 p.m. So in the month of July 1998, my friend John and I went on a hiking trip at Rattlesnake Ridge to collect rocks for John's geology class at Seattle University. We reached the gravel parking lot around 1 o'clock. At the beginning of the trailhead, there is a lake that is very active with waterfowl and occasional birds of prey. Normally this trailhead is semi-popular, and we noticed there were only 3 other cars in the lot at the time. Looking back now, I can say that this particular day was odd, and that we noticed no animal or bird activity, which normally is abundant around the lake at the trailhead. Everything was strangely quiet, and an ominous feeling seemed to loom everywhere. In fact, normally both John and myself are quite talkative when we hike, and even when we say very little to one another, we still communicate. Both of us had packed lunches in our backpacks along with our usual flashlights, waterproof matches, extra batteries, 2-way walkie-talkies, 1 cell phone, and 1 first aid kit. I was armed with my knife that is attached to my rucksack on the shoulder strap, as well as an H&K M&M pistol, which I kept in my fanny pack. We started our hike on the regular trailhead until we reached the opposite side of the lake. At this point, we exited the regular trail and began ascending up the mountain, moving diagonally toward the rock face of the mountain ridge. After approximately 20 minutes, we came upon a small creek that flowed downhill toward the lake. We decided to follow the creek upward, as it seemed to be going in the direction of our destination. We followed the stream for approximately another 15 minutes until we ran across an animal trail that also was going in the direction we were heading. However, the animal trail was moving diagonally and had fewer obstructions in our path, both of which made it easier to move up the mountain. Other than our own heavy breathing, we could hear nothing, and we said nothing as we continued our ascent. We continued on for what seemed like only 10 minutes or so when we began to hear a loud slurping sound ahead of us. We both looked at one another with a "what the hell" type of expression on our faces while continuing upward. The slurping grew louder, and now we could hear what sounded like a sigh in between each slurp. At this junction, the creek hooked around behind a hill in front of us and out of sight. Our trail would intersect with the creek once again just over this hill. At this time in the hike, John was ahead of me by approximately 8 to 10 feet. Suddenly, as we came over this hill, John froze in his steps, and I came up behind him, alerted by his actions. As I approached him from his 6, I looked over his shoulder and also saw what he was looking at. In front of us, and only 20 feet from our position, I saw what at first I thought was a huge bear drinking from the creek. As my brain tried to categorize the animal I was looking at, I suddenly realized that directly under its glutes were a pair of huge feet. Not hooves or paws, but actual feet, each having 5 toes. The feet were a dusty gray color with the same texture of the bottom of a dog's paw. As it knelt down, the glutes were as large as a Clydesdale's ass, and I'm not kidding. With the exception of the soles of its feet, this creature was covered in 4 to 5 inches in length, dark brown, almost black hair. Its hair on its butt was all matted, and it looked like he sat in a wet cow pie. Under his butt, I could clearly see testicles, and I knew it was a male. We stood there frozen with fear. I could not feel my legs, and my skin crawled from the adrenaline running through my blood. I remember my mouth going dry and feeling numb all over my mouth and face. The smell of this animal was indescribable. It was absolutely horrible, and I could feel my gag reflexes twitching. as I badly wanted to vomit. John's face was beet red, and his eyes were watering as his hand was over his mouth, also trying to hold back the nauseous feeling we had. He then tried to push back up, pushing me back also. We both tried to regain our balance while still keeping our eyes on this thing. It must have heard us moving because suddenly, in one quick motion, it jumped to its feet and spun around, facing us in a defensive posture. As it did this, it made a loud bark type of sound that seemed to make the trees shake. It stood there with its fists clenched and its arms raised in front, almost like a boxer. Its lips were curled, bearing these huge horse teeth as it glared directly at us, and it breathed heavily. The bottom half of his face was dripping with creek water, and his eyes were black, like a shark's eyes. I stood there, frozen out of fear and amazement of this animal's sheer size and agility. I am 6'2", and I only came up to his midsection. I can only guess that this animal was between 10 and 12 feet in height. It was much higher than a basketball rim and towered over us like we were children. I remember briefly thinking of grabbing my weapon, but even if I was able to empty my whole clip into him, he was still close enough to have been able to get us before he was neutralized. Therefore, all three of us just stood there for a good 1 minute 20 seconds or so and studied one another. I was absolutely in amazement at the incredible size of this creature. I remember every detail clearly, as if it were yesterday, and I will attempt to describe the proportions of this creature the way I had seen it. First of all, the feet on this creature were massive and were approximately 20 or more inches in length. The toenails and fingernails were dark colored with an orange tint to them. The creature did not have 1 ounce of fat on his entire body, and I could see the vascularity of every muscle. It seemed like they would have straightened if it weren't for the hair that covered them. The calves were twice the size of my own head, and his quads were as big as a tree trunks and swept out like a bodybuilder's. I'm not kidding. Those legs looked like they could squat a full-size Dodge pickup truck. The glutes were huge and muscular and very high like a track runner's. They tied into those enormous hamstrings that gave the animal a very explosive look. It looked like it could sprint at very high speeds. The waist was narrow and very powerful and solid looking. Above that, I could see these huge lats that flared out under his arms. His pectorals were wide and bulky looking. They were so big that they came up to his chin. I couldn't see any neck at all, but his traps and deltoids were what really caught my attention. First of all, the delts were as big as beach balls, and connected to them were these huge traps that flared out underward. They went from his deltoids to his ears. The top of his head was conical, and these bulky muscles streamed down from the tip of his cranium to his traps, kind of like the back of a gorilla's neck. Now, the face was not like an ape at all. It really looked like a Neanderthal in the facial features. The face had less hair than the rest of its body, all except for these thick eyebrows that pointed upward. He had no hair around his eyes or on his nose. The forehead was sloped and the eyebrow ridges protruded out, and under them were these deep eye sockets that sank deep in its skull. The cheekbones were very wide and high, and below them was this deep, powerful looking jawline. The nose had a ridge to it, like a human nose, and the nostrils flared out and forward. They weren't pointed down like a human nostril would be. When his lips relaxed a bit, I could see that he really didn't have any upper lip at all. It was very thin, and his bottom lip was larger. The mouth overall was very wide, as was his face. His arms were huge and bulky, and you could see his triceps bulging out, and his biceps looked like bowling balls. His forearms were abnormally long, and they too were bulging with muscles. His knuckles were huge, and the color of his skin was a cross between black and gray. Believe me, trying to describe this creature does not even begin to do it justice. I wish I could somehow download his picture from my brain and put it on the screen to show you his enormous proportions. In 1993, I shot a 1,200-pound bull elk near Yakima. The creature we saw that day had twice the muscle mass as my elk did, and I guarantee you he weighed no less than 1,500 pounds, easily. Finally, we had enough, and the urge to leave grew very strong. We began backing down the trail, keeping our eyes glued on the creature the entire time, except to look where we were going periodically. As we backed away, his arms dropped to his sides, and he opened his mouth and let out a soft and deep bellowing sound, kind of like the gurgling moan sound that a male lion does to declare his territory. Long after he was out of sight, we could hear this bellowing as we began a rapid descent down the mountain. When we reached the opening at the bottom near the lake, we opened up into full sprint all the way to the car. We drove all the way to Bellevue, Washington before we stopped for coffee to try and collect our thoughts. We didn't know how to begin to tell anyone what we had just seen. I don't think that I would have believed our own story if I hadn't seen it for myself. But I do feel better getting this off my chest. So that concludes our second encounter from Rattlesnake Ridge, Washington, state of Washington, King County. Wow. I have read and I have seen and heard a whole lot of Bigfoot encounters. The description of this creature, this Bigfoot, I don't even know what to say about this thing. What do you guys think about that description of just how absolutely enormous this thing was? Just totally ripped with muscles. I mean, you hear stories of Bigfoot, snapping off trees, oftentimes 8 feet up, and these trees are not little. Taking into consideration this description, you could see how that would happen. So much power. These things are so strong. And like I said, this is the detail that this person gave in their encounter. It's over the top. You don't get this much detail a lot of times. And just the sheer size and muscularity of this creature it's phenomenal. So I want to know how they stayed there and observed this thing. I don't know. I guess unless you're in that circumstance and you're there looking at this creature, you really don't know how you would react. Are you going to just freeze in fear and that would allow you to observe? Or what do you think? Would you have just bolted and got out of there? So yeah, leave me a comment. Let me know what you think about this encounter at Rattlesnake Ridge, Washington. I appreciate your thoughts on this. So yeah, that was two pretty amazing encounters that we shared tonight. I hope that you enjoyed these ones. Yeah, leave me a comment either way. any thoughts that you have. I appreciate all of your comments. It means a lot. So thank you once again. Appreciate each and every one of you for stopping by Bigfoot Lake tonight. Hope you have a great night, and we will see you on the next.